close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the air turning sharp with the scent of coal smoke and fresh-cut lumber. The rhythmic clatter of streetcars replaced by the deeper rumble of cable cars climbing impossible hills. Do you feel it? The nervous energy of a city that just survived complete destruction and is now rebuilding itself into something the world has never seen before. Welcome to San Francisco in the year 1880. We're not just looking at faded photographs today. Through AI reconstruction built from the meticulous surveys of William Hammond Hall and the detailed insurance maps of the Sanborn Company, we're stepping into the most audacious urban experiment of the Gilded Age. I'm your guide, and together we're going to walk through a city that exists between two worlds. Behind us lies the gold rush chaos of wooden shacks and muddy streets. Ahead, rising from the ashes of the 1870s fires, stands a metropolis of brick and ambition that will define the American West. Our journey will take us from the bustling chaos of the waterfront, where clipper ships still jostle with steamers, up through the rebirth of the financial district, across the engineering marvel that is Nob Hill, and into the gardens of a neighborhood that didn't exist a decade ago. San Francisco in 1880 is barely 30 years old, yet it's already America's 10th largest city. It's a place where fortunes are made overnight and lost before breakfast, where Chinese laborers build mansions for railroad barons who won't let them live in the same neighborhoods, where the very hills themselves are being reshaped by hydraulic monitors and steam shovels. Let's begin where everyone's story starts in this city, the edge of the continent. The fog is just beginning to lift as we stand at the foot of Market Street looking out over the bay. The waterfront is absolute pandemonium. Dozens of wharves jut into the water like wooden fingers, some stretching a quarter-mile into the bay. The smell hits you first. Salt water mixed with tar, wet rope, and the distinctive sweetness of redwood lumber stacked in massive piles. You hear a dozen languages being shouted simultaneously: Chinese, Italian, Spanish, German. The clang of cargo being loaded onto drays, the warning bells of approaching streetcars, and underneath it all, the constant creaking of wooden hulls against the piers. Look closely at those piers. Many of them are built directly over the remains of ships that were abandoned during the gold rush, their crews deserting the moment they reached port to head for the mining camps. The city literally built itself on top of its own hasty beginnings. We watch a clipper ship from China being unloaded, coolies carrying massive sacks of rice and tea, while customs inspectors argue with the ship's captain. Next to it, a modern steam freighter from New York is taking on California wheat, bound for Liverpool. This harbour is the hinge between east and west, the place where two oceans meet commerce. But here's what's remarkable. Within 20 years, this entire waterfront will be obsolete. The ferry building will rise just to our north, and the focus of shipping will shift dramatically. Some of these wooden piers will burn, others will simply rot and collapse as deeper water ports are built to handle larger vessels. We turn our backs to the water and face the city proper. Market Street stretches before us, impossibly wide at 120 feet across. It cuts through the city at an odd angle, fighting against the rigid grid that defines the rest of San Francisco. The street is paved with wooden blocks that muffle the sound of iron-rimmed wheels, creating a strange, hollow echo with each passing wagon. The buildings here are a mix of the old and the aggressively new. To our left, a three-story wooden structure leans slightly, a survivor from the 1850s that somehow escaped the fires. To our right, a brand new 6-story office building in the Second Empire style. Its cast-iron facade painted to look like stone, its ground floor occupied by a Wells Fargo office doing brisk business. The cable cars are the heartbeat of this street. Introduced just 3 years ago in 1877, they're still a novelty that draws crowds. You can hear them before you see them. The distinctive clang of the grip mechanism catching the underground cable. The conductor's bell warning pedestrians to clear the tracks. They're heading up California Street toward a destination that simply couldn't be reached by horse-drawn vehicles. The pedestrian traffic is unlike anything in the East. You see businessmen in proper suits walking alongside miners in from the Sierra Nevada, still wearing their dusty work clothes. Chinese men with long queues carry bamboo poles balanced across their shoulders. baskets hanging from each end. Women in elaborate Victorian dresses navigate the wooden sidewalks with practiced care, avoiding the gaps and loose planks. Notice the density of saloons. On some blocks there are 3 or 4 competing establishments. This is still very much a frontier city in spirit, even as it puts on the architectural airs of civilization. We push through the crowds toward Montgomery Street, the financial heart of not just the city, but the entire West Coast. The transformation is immediate. The wooden buildings disappear, replaced entirely by brick and stone structures that project permanence and stability. These are the headquarters of the mining companies, the banks that finance the railroads, the investment houses that control the silver flowing from Nevada's Comstock lode. The street feels narrower here despite being the same width, the taller buildings creating a canyon effect that channels the wind off the bay into a constant, cool breeze. We pause outside the Bank of California, its Greek Revival columns attempting to impose East Coast respectability on this western outpost. Inside those walls, fortunes are made and lost in hours. The California gold rush may be over, but the silver boom is in full swing, and every transaction, every speculation flows through this single block. But look closer at the people here. There's a desperation beneath the confidence. Many of these men know the boom won't last forever. They're racing against time, trying to extract every ounce of wealth before the veins run dry or the market crashes. This district will survive the great earthquake of 1906. Though many of these specific buildings won't, the street itself will remain the financial centre for another century before gradually yielding to the towers further south. We climb California Street, gripping the cable car's outer rail as it hauls us up the impossible grade. The mechanical achievement is staggering. Without these cars, Nob Hill would be unreachable, reserved only for those wealthy enough to maintain private carriages. Now for a nickel, anyone can make the ascent. The view opens up as we rise. Behind us, the bay spreads out in brilliant blue, crowded with vessels. Ahead, the mansions begin to appear. We're entering a different world entirely. At the summit, we step off onto streets that feel transplanted from Paris or Vienna. The Big Four, the railroad magnates who connected California to the rest of the nation, have built palaces here that would make European aristocrats jealous. Look at the Hopkins mansion to our right, a Gothic fantasy of turrets and carved wood that seems to defy gravity on this hilltop. Across the street, the Crocker mansion sprawls across an entire block. These aren't homes, they're monuments to ambition, built by men who started with nothing and bent an entire continent to their will. The air is noticeably cleaner up here. The fog that blankets the lower city burns off more quickly at this elevation, and the prevailing winds carry the smoke and stench of the industrial districts away. You can smell the gardens, the imported roses and jasmine that thrive in the California climate. A private carriage passes, its team of matching black horses, perfectly groomed, a liveried driver staring straight ahead while the passengers remain hidden behind velvet curtains. There's almost no foot traffic. This hill belongs to perhaps 50 families, and they guard their elevation fiercely. What they don't know is that their reign is already limited. In 26 years, the earthquake will level most of these mansions, and some will be rebuilt, but many of the families will abandon the hill entirely, moving to new neighbourhoods further west. The Fairmont Hotel will rise on this spot, and Nob Hill will transform from exclusive residential enclave to luxury hotel district. We descend the northern slope, heading toward North Beach. The transition is jarring. Within 6 blocks, the marble and mahogany of Nob Hill gives way to wooden tenements and narrow alleys. This is the Italian quarter, though the Chinese are pushing in from the east, creating a complex patchwork of languages and cultures. The smell of baking bread competes with incense and drying fish. Laundry hangs from every window, strung across the alleys in elaborate webs. Children play in the street, dodging delivery wagons with practiced ease. A hurdy-gurdy plays somewhere nearby, the cheerful music oddly out of place against the poverty. These families came for the same reason everyone comes to San Francisco, chasing the promise of something better. Many work in the canneries along the waterfront or in the small factories that are beginning to appear south of Market. This neighbourhood feels permanent, lived in, but it too will be largely destroyed in 1906. When it's rebuilt, the Italians will consolidate their hold, creating the North Beach that will later become famous for its cafes and beatnik poets. Our final stop is the Presidio, the old Spanish military fort on the northern tip of the peninsula. We stand at the edge of the continent, looking out at the Golden Gate, that mile-wide channel connecting the bay to the Pacific. The wind here is relentless, cold even in summer, carrying the salt spray and the bellowing of sea lions from the rocks below. The Presidio itself is now a US Army post, its whitewashed adobe buildings slowly being replaced by proper wooden barracks. There's talk of a bridge someday, spanning this gap to connect the city with the wildlands of Marin to the north. In 1880 it seems like pure fantasy. The engineering doesn't exist, the money certainly doesn't exist. Yet the dream persists, whispered in planning meetings and sketched on napkins in Montgomery Street saloons. They have no idea that in 57 years, the impossible will become reality. The sun is setting now, painting the fog that's rolling in through the gate in shades of gold and rose. The city behind us is lighting its gas lamps, thousands of small flames pushing back the darkness. San Francisco in 1880 is a city that believes in its own mythology, convinced that it's destined for greatness despite sitting on a geological knife's edge. Everything we've seen today, the piers, the offices, the mansions, exists in defiance of logic and nature. That's what makes it unmistakably San Francisco, the city that shouldn't exist but refuses to disappear. Standing here at the edge of the continent as the fog rolls in, you realize San Francisco isn't just a place, it's an argument against impossibility. Every street we've walked, every building we've seen exists because someone refused to accept that cities can't be built on 43 hills at the edge of the world. The waterfront will change, the mansions will fall, even the hills themselves will be moved and reshaped. But that fundamental defiance, that absolute conviction that anything can be rebuilt, reimagined, or reinvented, that stays in the DNA of this place. If you could step through any doorway in 1880 San Francisco, where would you go? Would you brave the chaos of the waterfront docks, or would you take tea in a Nob Hill parlour overlooking the bay? Let me know in the comments and tell me which city we should reconstruct next. Until then, remember that the most impossible cities often become the most unforgettable.